I'm leaving my boyfriend to go back to my ex, and I don't get why my boyfriend is so upset about it. Story time. So 2 years ago, I dated this guy called Steve. I don't know if I really believe in soulmates, but if they do exist, Steve is my soulmate. We broke up because it was a right person, wrong time situation. When we broke up, we both said if we were meant to be, we'd find each other again in the future. But recently, I started dating this guy called Dave. And I had said from the start I wasn't intending to get into a relationship with this guy. It was just supposed to be like a casual vibe. It was like friends with benefits at most. He asked me why and I explained everything. The conversation went a little bit like this. Why don't you want a serious relationship? Because I have some unfinished business with my ex. That last chapter isn't finished, so why would I start a new one? Well, why can't you just close the chapter now? Because I'm not ready. But when will you be ready? I don't know. Well, whatever, I'll just wait for you anyway. I can't lie and say I don't have feelings for him, but he's just nothing compared to Steve. So after 5 months of dating, he finally stopped asking me to be his girlfriend around month 3. I mean, that's probably because I said, if you ask me one more time, I am going to step away from you. Anytime we started to get a little bit too serious for my liking, I remind him that we weren't exclusive and that there was no strings attached. I even encouraged him to date other people. I was open and honest this whole time. So cut to the chase. Steve is back. I ran into him in a coffee shop the other day. We were there for so long we ended up getting kicked out. It was like everything came back at once. At night he took me out on a date and we talked so much that our food went cold. He was telling me all about his life, all the changes that he'd made, and all the reasons and obstacles as to why we broke up last time had all disappeared. So then I told him about my life and I also told him about Dave. And he asked if there was any chances for him. So on the way home from the date, I immediately called Dave and told him everything. It destroyed him. So after this, I waited 3 weeks before officially breaking up with Dave. Dave then proceeded to call me the devil. I was honest with him the whole time. So what do you think? Am I the arsehole? Am I the arsehole for slapping my cousin after what he did to my cat? Story time. This all happened last night and I've just woken up to the biggest shit show ever. So me and my family have these monthly big meetups. And I have a cousin who we'll call Tom, who is the biggest brat ever. To say he's a pain in the ass is an understatement. So for the context, I'm not feeling too great. I'm struggling with a little bit of the food poisoning. So whilst all of my family were around, I just chilled in my room, played on my Xbox with my little kitten Penelope. But I'm just chilling, having a nice time, and Tom barges into my room and screams at me that he wants to play on the Xbox. And at this point, I would usually just allow it and let him have a go. But I was really in that I'm not taking no shit mood and told him to just get out my room. But apparently he wasn't having any of that. Next thing I know, he is stood at the side of my bed screaming full volume into my ear. At which point I just told him to fuck off. He turned around, went to walk out the room, then turned back at me and proceeded to kick Penelope against the side of the bed. And I don't really know what came over me. I got out of my bed so quick and slapped this boy across the face. And I told him to never touch my cat again or I'd do much worse. He ran down the stairs and I could hear him talking to my uncle. He was crying and being an overall little bitch. My dad came storming into my room and was yelling at me, telling me I was wrong for what I did. But that was when I reversed that and was like, he kicked the cat, Dad. Then my dad stopped, turned around and calmly walked down the stairs and then let rip. This morning I have woken up to many abusive and threatening messages from my uncle and my cousin, and it's now progressed to messages from unknown numbers as well. So what do you think? Am I the arsehole? Am I wrong for not inviting my adopted parents to my wedding? Story time. So I'm getting married to my fiancé of 2 years in May. When I was a baby, I was adopted by a couple in their 50s. They did everything for me. They supported me through college, put me in a good education. Literally anything I wanted, I had. We always had a good relationship and I love them to bits. So when I was 23, I decided I wanted to go on a hunt for my biological parent. Long story short, I found out that they had me when they were 14 and they just couldn't support me back then. But that they were still together and they actually had 2 more children. I also found out that they had tried to contact my adopted parents when I was in my teens. They said that they had really wanted to form a relationship with me, but my adopted parents had refused any contact. So when I confronted my adopted parents over all of this, they said that they'd refused because they were scared that I would prefer my biological parents over them and leave them. I was absolutely heartbroken over this, so much so that I actually cut down my contact with my adopted parents. Recently, our relationship has massively improved and we are back on good terms. So for the wedding, I asked my biological father if he would walk me down the aisle. And he obviously said yes. When my adopted parents found out about this, they said that their worst fear had come true. They also said that if I insisted on putting my biological parents before them, that they weren't going to attend the wedding. So I spoke to my biological dad and said, would you be happy for both of my dads to walk me down the aisle? And he was super supportive of this. However, my adopted parents refused. They said that they had done all the hard work and if they had to share the spotlight, they didn't want to be involved at all. So I told them that I would give them a couple of days to think about it. And they came back saying that if they weren't the ones to walk me down the aisle, then they weren't coming. And with that, they were uninvited. Since then, literally all of my adopted family has been calling me an arsehole. So am I the arsehole here? My husband cheated on me, so I gave him a taste of his own medicine. Story time. Me and Steve had happily been married for 4 years before he one day decided he wanted to propose the idea of an open relationship. I immediately shot this down, it just wasn't for me. So a few months passed and I started to notice some weird behaviours from Steve. He was going on more nights out with his friends, late night phone conversations, and we were growing more and more distant as the days went on. So I suspected the worst, so I decided to hire a private investigator. And this confirmed my worst fears. Steve had been seeing someone else. So instead of confronting him, I decided to hatch a little plan. The revenge was sweet and simple and perfectly fitting for the situation. I invited an old friend, Alan, over. Alan was an actor, and Alan was more than ready to play his part in this retribution. So I called Steve and I told him that I'd be working one night really late in the office, so I wouldn't be able to answer the phone. When in reality, I was actually just round at Alan's deciding what we were going to do. We were preparing for an Oscar-worthy level performance. So the next day, again, I texted Steve and told him that I would be working late. And it wasn't rare for Steve to just let himself into my apartment whenever I was working super late. So me and Alan sat on my sofa and just waited for him to walk in. Just as planned, Steve walked in and me and Alan was sat super close on the sofa, bottle of wine on the go. So as Steve walked into the room, Alan launched into action. He launched himself on top of me, started kissing me, and Steve just stood there in the doorway, frozen. And that was when Alan looked up from the sofa, looked Steve dead in the eye and said, "Oh, I didn't realise your ex-husband was going to be back so early." The mention of ex-husband was the final straw. Steve bolted from our house. That wasn't the end. No. The next day, I served Steve with our divorce papers. And that was when I explained everything about the night before with Alan, that it was a setup, that I knew exactly what had been going on. The look on his face was priceless when he realised the lengths I'd gone to. I was proud that I didn't have to stoop to his level to prove my point. So I guess in the end, maybe he did get his idea of an open relationship, just not in the way he expected. Am I the arsehole for wearing sexy clothes around my roommate's boyfriend? Story time. So I live in the city and I share my apartment with 2 other girls. I work 2 jobs and when I get home, I'm usually absolutely exhausted. So when I come home, I'll normally just make tea, have a shower and go straight to bed. All of this was absolutely fine until one of my roommate's boyfriends started to stay over more often. This did not bother me at all. Last Sunday morning, I was in the kitchen just making myself some coffee and Amy's boyfriend Steve came in and asked if he could have some coffee as well. And from this, we just got chatting. After about 15 minutes, Amy came in and she looked visibly annoyed. So I asked her what was up and she was just like, nothing, and then walked out. When Steve left, she came into my room and asked if she could talk to me about something. She told me that my boobs were distracting. She told me to consider wearing a bra or even a thick hoodie when I'm in the common areas of our flat. And then she went as far as to suggest that I just buy takeout so I don't need to use the kitchen when her and their boyfriends are in the house. The thing is, when I was making coffee that day, I was wearing a grey t-shirt and grey tracksuit bottoms. And Steve, the boyfriend, was just in his boxers. And she was wearing this silk little cute nightdress from Victoria's Secret. For some context, Amy is 6 foot tall, she's stunning, she's modelled in the past. So I'm 5'6", and even though I'm happy with myself and how I look, I just don't compare to her. Like, I would never be classed as a threat to a girl like her. So I obviously thought all of this was a joke, so I laughed. And then she started to cry, which was kind of awkward, and told me that her boyfriend had started to talk about my boobs all the time. I was so grossed out. So all of this week, I've been buying takeout every night and staying in my room. So yesterday, I came home at 6 p.m. with a pizza, and my roommates and all of their boyfriends were already in the kitchen and in the living room. So I just kept my head down and walked straight through and went straight to my room. That was when I heard Amy shout pizza again. If you keep eating like that, you're never going to fit through your bedroom door. Am I the arsehole for returning my boyfriend's birthday present when I found out what his girl best friend said about me? Story time. This happened last night and my phone is still blowing up. So I recently dipped into my savings to buy my boyfriend Steve a PS5. So for some background, when I was 18, I was involved with a guy called Alan. We ended shortly after that and then I moved on to a guy called Dave. And me and Dave worked together. I found out months later that Dave and Alan were actually really close friends, but I wasn't dating Alan long enough to meet his friends, so I had no idea. So upon finding this out, I took some time away from dating because I'm not gonna lie, it kind of scared me a bit. And then 3 years later, I met Steve, my boyfriend. And when I met Steve, I was completely upfront about what happened and that the fact that I'd been involved with friends in the past. But he said he understood and that my past didn't bother him. So last night at the party, I showed up with the PS5 that I'd bought him. And he and his friends were screaming with joy about it. I was like, I have gained some real girlfriend points here. But then his best friend Amy laughed at me and said, I wish I was a thought so I could afford a PS5. Girl, the way I would have chose violence. I looked at her with like an excuse me face and she just said, never mind, and walked away. So I confronted Steve about this and he said, and I quote, she's just messing with you, why can't you take a joke? I pushed even further and I was like, why is this girl even calling me names? And my boyfriend turned to me and said, well, everybody knows you're a bit of a slag before you got with me. So I was like, all right, let's unpack this. What makes you think I was a slag? And he said, because you messed with best friends. He then patted me on the shoulder and said, but it's okay, babe, because we know you're a completely different person to who you were back then. He then turned around and said that if he could get past my thought mentality and colourful past, I could get past the comments that Amy had said. He said he gave me another chance, so I should give Amy another chance. I didn't say anything. I just got up, took the PS5 from the gift table and walked out. Safe to say he was pissed. I took that PS5 straight back to the shop that I got it from, and they happily refunded the price for me. Steve started blowing up my phone, telling me that I can drop the petty act now. Amy's messaging me telling me that I'm a bad girlfriend for not being able to take a joke. And the final straw was when Steve texted me and said that I'd brought all this on by making bad choices in my past. I responded and said that he obviously deserved better than me and to find somebody that wasn't a thought and that would buy him a PS5 instead. I suggested even dating Amy. So what do you think? Am I the arsehole here? Am I the arsehole for being mad at my mother-in-law for returning my wedding dress? Story time. But me and Steve are getting married in December, and his mum is definitely the intrusive type. Overall, she is nice and we do somewhat get along. I hate to admit it, but the wedding planning has been an absolute nightmare because of her. She has disagreed on so many of my decisions. So because Steve is her only son, she has this whole big idea of what the wedding wants to be. And if anything goes against her vision, it's not happening. So when it came to wedding dress shopping, she insisted on coming. So I went with my mum and my friends and her. And I was so lucky to find my dream dress on the first go. But she had already been to the shop and had picked me out a dress. She said, this is the dress I always dreamed of my son's bride wearing. My mum and all of her friends thought that this line was hella creepy. The dress was vile. I'm just going to say the dress was really ugly. I was really nice about it. I apologised and thanked her for her ideas, but I'd already chosen my dress. She then got all pissy and started texting Steve. Steve came home ranting about how I'd made his mum upset. And he said it was really disrespectful that I'd turned down her help on finding a wedding dress. He got all upset saying that my attitude wasn't working for him. He went on and on just asking me to consider the dress his mum had chosen. He even went as far as to say that they weren't that different. And let me tell you, those dresses were different. We went back and forth arguing about this dress. But thank God eventually he did just drop it. Until yesterday, when I came home and realised that Steve had taken my wedding dress and swapped it for the one that his mum wanted me to get. I immediately called him and lost my shit. He admitted it straight away. I started screaming at him down the phone. He asked me to calm down. Never ask a woman to calm down. I was not about to face this man, so I went to stay at my best friend Amy's house. He began calling my phone over and over again, leaving me messages saying that I was overreacting. He said that this was his wedding too. And he insisted that I give this dress a chance. He kept saying that his mum just has good intentions and she has this vision that she really wants to make come true. His mum then texted me and said that she just wanted what was best for me as her future daughter-in-law. He then suggested that I wisen up and just go with the flow. So what do you think? Am I the arsehole for exposing my boyfriend in front of his family? Story time. Me and Steve have been together for 2 years now, and he is currently unemployed. He used to have a really good high-paying job, but he ended up getting fired because he had a fight with a co-worker. Red flag number 1. So every Friday we go round to his mum's house for dinner. It's basically me and all of his family. And he had made it clear he did not want his family to know that he was unemployed. And this is basically because he didn't want them to know that I was paying all of the bills at the minute. He stressed over and over again how emasculated it made him feel. So last night we are sat at the table, eating our meal, and that was when his cousin mentioned that his fiancé was going to go for a boob job. Steve was like, you cannot be serious, she has got perfect boobs. He was like, I can't understand why she'd want a boob job. Steve then turned at me and stared at my chest. I have a bit of a smaller chest and I'm a bit insecure about it. So then I don't know why he thought this was a good idea. Turns to me and says, why don't you get a boob job? You're the one who needs it. The way his mum gasped, she was like, Steve, why would you say that? So as you can imagine, at that point, I saw red. And I turned around and said, I'll get a boob job when you get an actual job. Considering you've been unemployed for 6 months now. Steve just stared at me in disbelief. His mum then began questioning him about being unemployed. Steve was just like, deny, deny, deny. But eventually he did admit the truth. At which point his mum started ripping him a new one. It got really awkward really quick with people shaming him for hiding it. Literally to the point when he went and sat in the car until I came out. He then started yelling at me saying I could have held my fucking tongue, which I was like, your comment about my chest was insulting. And he said he was just trying to give me a bit of advice. And that was when my darling partner turned around and said, there's nothing wrong with me wanting you to look pretty. He tried to justify it by saying that what he had said was out of support and encouragement. And he said that what I said was with the intent of hurting his feelings. Did we hurt your feelings, Steve? Later that evening, I called him to see if he was alright, only to have the phone picked up by his friend Alan, who made it very clear that Steve was very much still upset with me. So what do you think? Am I the arsehole in this situation? My sister's in love with my fiancé. Story time. Me and my fiancé Steve are getting married in 3 months. So it all started because mine and Steve's family had actually never met before. We threw a little family get together with both families so everyone could become friends and get to know each other. It was going to be great, so we thought. So this is why, even though me and Steve have been together for years, my sister Amy has never met Steve. And I'm a very private person, so I don't really post pictures of me and Steve on the internet either. So Amy literally had no idea what Steve looked like, what he was like, anything. The day comes and everybody is at the restaurant. We are all getting on really well, and my sister Amy was late because she had work. So when Amy entered, I was there to greet her with a big hug, as normal, you know, big sis vibes. She, on the other hand, was not very happy to see me. She walked in, took one look around the table and started screaming at me. She was like, how could you do this to me? It was, honestly, it was so dramatic. I looked at mum looked confused. Then I looked at my dad, and my dad just rolled his eyes. Amy has literally always been the drama queen in the family. This girl threw a full-blown temper tantrum in the middle of this restaurant. My mum literally manhandled this girl to the toilet to get her out. Steve's family were just, bless them, they had no clue what was going on. They just didn't say anything. So the dinner continued, but let me tell you, it was so awkward afterwards. So when I got home, I was looking at my phone and I literally had hundreds of texts from Amy. She was like, you need to call off this wedding. I've been in love with Steve for years. I'm not gonna lie, I didn't even know they knew each other. So I was like, oh, Steve, like, what do you know about this? And he was just saying how he had no clue how Amy had come up with any of this. But the next day, my mum came round to tell me what had happened. I had no clue. I was like, please, dear, shed some light on this situation. And I tell you, you aren't ready, buckle in. Oh, many years ago, Steve worked in a bowling alley. And this is where Amy first saw Steve. Oh my God, this powder is so bright. And she claims that it was love at first sight between the two of them. This was 5 years ago, and she said that she knew that Steve was older than her, so she was waiting until she was 21 to make the first move on it. Babe, it's giving Delulu. This girl is literally convinced that she had a chance with Steve. She keeps texting me saying how I need to break up with her boyfriend, and she's even said that if I don't end up breaking up with Steve, she will make it her mission to ruin our wedding. And now I literally have no freaking clue what to do, so please tell me.